Looking to supercharge your metabolism effortlessly? Meet Java Burn. This game-changing supplement boosts fat burning with its natural blend of ingredients like green tea extract and L-theanine. Simply add it to your morning coffee for a tasteless, instant upgrade. Feel the difference in energy and well-being. Try it risk-free today and kickstart your weight loss journey. Don't miss out. Click the link below. Java Burn, your secret weapon for a healthier you.
Sleep is a time machine. We close our eyes at night, then open them when it's morning. Usually, we don't think about all the time that's gone by in between. It has, though. Things happen during that time. Some good, some bad. But the night doesn't always want you to sleep those hours away in ignorance. Sometimes, the night asks you to pay attention. Or rather, it demands it. Take that as a warning. 'Cause today, we're going back to a town that ignored the night, and we'll learn how they paid the price for that ignorance. If you haven't yet, go back and listen to part 1. If you're all caught up, here's a recap. A few summers ago, I rented a house on Cape Cod, the same one I'd stayed in with my grandma and my cousins, way back when I was 15. And the same neighbor that creeped me out as a kid still lived next door. When I got to talking with him, he told me about the forgotten town of Nowhere, right there on the Cape, and the time its residents shut down a factory that employed most of the town's night workers. A local named Rachel was on the case. She was a failed journalist who'd moved back home in shame, then stayed to take care of her sick mom. She considered Nowhere as dull as dirt, till she found the town selectman's corpse hanging from a tree, misshapen and flattened, like it'd been sucked dry. After that, Rachel learned the factory workers were actually ancient vampiric creatures called the Night Folk. But she didn't actually believe in this wild folklore. Not right away. Not until she snuck into the factory and saw the foreman swallow the town mayor's head in one gulp. You're listening to Run Fool. I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 34, The Night Folk, Part 2. The mayor's body writhed as his guts and organs were vacuumed out of it. His belly collapsed and flattened. The skin tightened over his arms and legs. His head bulged as his entrails traveled through it. The foreman's mouth stayed suctioned in place. His throat bobbed up and down as he drank. Rachel watched it all. A deep, paralyzing fear cascaded through her, which, unfortunately, had a mind of its own. So really, Rachel had no control over the gasp that escaped her lips. Soon as that sound came out of her, she slapped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. One by one, each of the night folk turned to look directly at Rachel. Rachel backed away into the dark hallway she'd come from, but she could still see through the crack in the door. The night folk were all staring at her. Then, their mouths began to open, wider and wider, impossibly wide. All at once, they broke into a sprint towards Rachel. She screamed and shot down the hallway. Her hands felt around her, trying to find her way as she stumbled. Voices called out at her back, then rose up all around her. She felt something pull on her hair. Fingers grazed her shoulders and back. She started sobbing then, because she understood how impossible it was to run through this darkness. These things, they were the darkness. In a Hail Mary, Rachel veered to the right. She expected to hit the wall of the corridor, but she didn't. There was an open space in front of her. She ran forward as fast as she could. But then the ground disappeared beneath her feet. She went airborne, screaming as she plunged downwards, with no idea where she was or what was around her. And then, She hit something soft and wet. She landed on a pile of, well, judging by the nauseating stench, it was something dead. She gagged. It wasn't until she felt a hard, smooth object that she understood. She was holding a cow hoof. She remembered the foreman's wheelbarrow of flattened cow bodies. This must be where they kept those carcasses before tossing them. It occurred to her that the night folk had been eating these animals, sucking out their insides, then using their skin for the factory's leather production. Kind of a great operation. These ancient things had hidden in plain sight, working a job that suited them just fine, until Nowhere stepped in and screwed it all up. Rachel tried to move through the rancid muck, flies at her face. Her arms reached out for the edge of the pit. Her fingertips hit the slick metal wall, and she forced herself to feel along its surface, searching for an exit. Then she heard something. Amid the squelching of guts she moved through, it was the sound of a noisy wind that wasn't wind at all. It was coming from above. The night folk had found her. She scrambled around, desperately searching for a door, not knowing if one was even there, or if she was as dead as the cow she waded through. But then, there was a raised edge on the wall, a hatch. She felt a heavy metal bolt. Rachel yanked on it. Nothing moved. It was rusted, from all the nasty fluids probably. Rachel pulled harder, throwing her body into it. The voices above got louder. She could hear them moving. The night folk were coming. Rachel screamed as she gave a final heave. Then the bolt shifted, just a little, but it was enough to give her hope. She pulled. She felt a hand on her neck, and then the bolt slid back. Rachel ripped the hatch open and threw herself through it. When she stood, she realized she was outside. The cool coastal air made her shiver. She was very aware that she was covered in entrails and other dead things, but who cared? She had to get the hell out of there. Except she couldn't. A figure stood in her way. The foreman. It was too dark to see the foreman's face, but she could feel his stare, deep and penetrating. She didn't know what to say. She should beg for her life, but those words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself asking a question, something along the lines of, what the hell was going on? The foreman seemed to consider her. Rachel's heart was in her throat while he did this. Of course, he could be deciding whether to reply or to feed. Turned out it was the former. The foreman's drawl was slow and measured, as he told her exactly what the hell was happening. The night folk had been disrespected by the town for far too long, and taking away their factory, their home, that was the last straw. So they were going to take back Nowhere, tonight, while everyone was gathered together under the stars. Rachel's mouth went dry. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt like sandpaper. All she could do was cough. The foreman went on to say he had an offer. See, Rachel might not know this, but he knew her, knew how she felt about this place, and he understood she'd just as soon leave Nowhere behind. So, she could go, but she had to actually go, because if he saw her again, he'd assume she was just like everyone else, ungrateful. Rachel hesitated, thinking that if she ran, he'd follow, maybe hunt her down like prey. But he didn't move. Instead, he held up his wrist, which had a watch on it. He tapped it. She took off. Even if he chased her, it was better than standing there. She ran as fast as she could, down the road into town where the festival was in full swing. The noise and lights swelled around her as she raced through. She could hear the town's laughter and revelry. She could even smell the mouth-watering fried dough. But she didn't stop. Rachel was going to listen to the foreman and get out of town. But she had to risk making a detour, because she had someone who depended on her. Her mom. It felt like ages before her house appeared in the distance, Its windows were dark. Her mom was probably asleep. Rachel ran into the house. It was quiet. Too quiet. The silence stopped Rachel cold. There was something missing. The medical machines, they were all off. Rachel stared into the living room. It was pitch black. All the curtains were closed, so the moonlight wasn't even coming in. Rachel lingered in the entrance. This was the most terrified she'd ever felt, even more scared than she'd been at the factory. She was dreading that dark, quiet room and what she'd find there. But somehow, she found the courage and stepped into the darkness. She felt around blindly for a light. Relief rushed through her when she grabbed onto a porcelain lamp, the one by her mom's cot. She clicked it on. The room burst into view. Her mother lay in her bed, but she wasn't sleeping. Rachel's mom had been sucked dry, her guts shoved out of each and every part of her face. Her features were bloated with blood and entrails, head full of the residual intestines and muck that had formerly lived inside her. Her body, which had already been withered, was now thin and crumpled, like an empty suit laid out on the bed. Rachel's vision blurred. She was going into shock. The delirium made her head swim. She hunched over, squeezing her eyes shut, moaning in pain, grief, all of it. Her mind wouldn't work. She couldn't think. Everything just went blank. All she could do was whisper two little words. Night folk. Then, as if she'd called it into existence, a figure emerged from the black shadows behind her mom. Rachel watched the person step closer until the table lamp's glare illuminated their face. It was Anna, the night nurse. Now here's the thing. You're probably getting a bad feeling here, that Anna was up to no good, considering she'd disappeared and now was suddenly back, emerging from the shadows, right beside Rachel's eviscerated mother. But remember, Rachel was in shock, and I can tell you firsthand, you're not really capable of putting two and two together when you're in shock like that. So when Rachel first saw Anna, she was relieved. Her first thought, a familiar face in the midst of all this horror. She even asked Anna what happened, or if she knew who did this. Anna didn't say anything, and as the seconds passed, Rachel finally felt a twinge in her stomach. Dread, most likely. Because that feeling you and I had just moments before, it was finally sinking in for Rachel. That's why her voice shook, and she asked Anna again, what happened? Anna's stoic face twinged a bit. A glimpse of emotion managed to make it through. Pity. She said sorry. She liked Rachel's mom, but her people wanted a clean slate. That meant getting rid of everyone. Yep, that did it. Rachel finally realized what was going on here. Anna was one of them.
Looking to supercharge your metabolism effortlessly? Meet Java Burn. This game-changing supplement boosts fat burning with its natural blend of ingredients like green tea extract and L-theanine. Simply add it to your morning coffee for a tasteless, instant upgrade. Feel the difference in energy and well-being. Try it risk-free today and kickstart your weight loss journey. Don't miss out. Click the link below. Java Burn, your secret weapon for a healthier you.
It made sense. Anna's daddy had been a factory worker. Her job was under the cover of darkness. Rachel didn't know why she hadn't thought of it, but now she was wishing she'd been a little warmer to Anna, hadn't taken her for granted. Because even though the foreman had decided to let her leave, it didn't seem like Anna was feeling so generous. Anna slunk forward. Her form slid along the shadows at the edges of the lamplight. She moved like a wraith, not a person. Rachel was once again reminded that these folk were an extension of the night, and there was no running from the night. Anna danced closer. Her body swayed as she approached, just as her jaw gradually opened, wider and wider and wider, until Rachel could see down her throat. A tongue lashed around the maw, flicking over dry, stretched-out lips. A mouth that should be impossible, but there it was. Rachel frantically looked around the room for something to fight with. Her gaze slid over her mom's cot, the now quiet medical equipment, the IV bag, a heart monitor, nothing that would help her. And before Rachel could find something that would, Anna lunged. Rachel did too. It was pure instinct, but her hand lashed out to grab that porcelain lamp from her mother's bedside table. She hucked it straight into Anna's open mouth. It shattered on impact, plunging the room into darkness. Anna shrieked and stumbled backwards. The light from the kitchen shone in, just enough for Rachel to see how much damage had been done. Anna's mouth hung open, loose, bloodied, and tattered. Her cheeks dripped crimson. Even so, she hissed, then lunged again. Rachel leapt behind her mom's cot, kicking the rolling bed into Anna's path. The nurse tripped over it, flying onto the other side, and unfortunately, onto Rachel. A brawl ensued, with Rachel writhing like a caged animal and Anna trying to latch her gruesome mouth onto Rachel's face. Rachel kicked and flailed, screamed until she went hoarse. Anna grabbed her arm, trying to pin her down, but her grip was slick with the blood from her mouth. Rachel wormed her way free. She staggered to her feet and tried to run, but Anna's teeth sank into her ankle. The bite held tight, tearing into tendons. Rachel pitched forward. Her head missed the room's stone fireplace by inches. As she hit the ground, she saw the hearth's fire poker. It was in a stand with the billow and brush. She snatched it and jabbed it towards her ankle. The tip rammed into Anna's eye, popping it like a cherry. Anna gave a startled gurgle, then collapsed. Her jaw loosened, and Rachel yanked her foot away. Anna lay still. A pool of blood grew around her head. The house was silent once again. It took a few minutes for Rachel's adrenaline to dwindle, but when it did, the horror of it all rushed through her. The night folk with their uncanny mouths and stench of death were terrifying, but her mom was dead. Sobs racked Rachel's body as she crawled towards her mother's bedside, reached up, grabbed her hand, pressed her lips to her mother's cold skin. Now I've lost loved ones to a slow disease like this, and I can tell you firsthand, anticipating death doesn't mean the loss doesn't hurt, even if you know it's coming. There's just no way to predict how devastating it actually feels. Rachel was having to reckon with that. This was a moment she thought about for ages, and it had finally come. It was more sudden, more violent, and horrible than she'd thought. But the part she was really struggling with was the deep void her mom left. Now, there was no one to go to for advice, no one to hold her hand, no one to smile at her with that unconditional love. The thing was, Rachel had always focused on how needed she was. But it turned out, Rachel needed her mom too, maybe even more. Who knows how much time passed, minutes or hours, but eventually Rachel exhausted herself from crying. And when she did, she found herself staring at Anna's body. The foreman's words echoed in her mind. They were going to take back nowhere, tonight, while the whole town was gathered together under the stars. Oh yeah, the night folk were going to kill a whole lot of people at the town festival tonight. And no one knew what was about to happen. No one but Rachel. There was quite a bit of thinking that went into Rachel's decision about what to do next. She needed to leave before the night folk descended on this place. And honestly, now that her mom was dead, there wasn't anything keeping her. She could finally go. Start over somewhere. Get her life back on track. Baby even write about all this? But it's funny. Life outside of nowhere used to fill Rachel with longing. She'd always thought her hometown was boring. Beneath her, maybe her mom's death had made her soft, or nostalgic, or just traumatized. But the thought of leaving nowhere to the wolves didn't sit right with her. For better or worse, this town had been a safe haven when she needed it, and she realized she hadn't done much for nowhere in return. Now, she could. She checked her watch. It was only 9 o'clock. The festival hadn't been going on for very long. Rachel was sure she still had time, but she had to hurry. She ran out the door and into the night, down the coastal road, past the tree the selectmen hung from, and into the town proper. As she approached, she realized something was wrong. The swell of music was gone. It was quiet. No loud voices. No signs of revelry. No fried dough wafting through the air. When she turned a corner and finally got a view of the town square, she realized why. Everyone was already dead. The street lights flickered on and off, blinking over the carnage below. Corpses littered the streets of nowhere, all with the same bloated, puffy heads and thin, dried-up bodies. They'd been sucked dry, every last one of them. Rachel stepped forward. Something squashed under her shoe. She'd stepped on a hand. It was all shriveled and tiny and stuck out of the sleeve of a police uniform. Her eyes traveled to the puffy, leaking face. Chris, the officer who she'd gone to school with back in the day. Looked as though she was right about him. He'd spent his whole damn life in nowhere. She backed away then, because she understood that she shouldn't have come and that she needed to get out of there before. A series of whispers rose around her, coming from the night. It didn't take long for those whispers to become voices and the shadows to become people. The night folk suddenly stood all around the town square, just outside the glare of the malfunctioning street lamps. Their eyes lit up with each burst of light, kind of like when a raccoon gets caught in your car's headlights. It's unnerving, right? The way they stare at you, and only you. That's what these folks were doing to Rachel, staring at the last human alive in nowhere. Rachel stepped back. Her heart beat so hard she was sure the night folk could hear it. She tried to talk to them, to plead for her life, but the words wouldn't come. If she could have spoken, she would have said she understood now. Community is about balance. Everyone has a role, and all those roles work together. If you think someone needs you, you probably need them just as much. This town was wrong to think they could live without the factory, without the night folk. But yeah, she didn't get to say all that. Her tongue stayed useless for one, but also, as she was backing up, she stepped right into the arms of the foreman. His dense embrace tightened around her. She felt the heat of his breath on her neck, and by the force of it, she knew, even without looking, that his mouth had opened wide. She found her voice again, and she pleaded for her life. She begged and begged until she was hoarse, and nothing else came out. The foreman let her finish. He held her against his chest, letting her sob. But when she looked up into his eyes, she didn't see sympathy. She saw patience. The foreman had waited a long time to take back his town, so he could wait a few more minutes while Rachel finished up. Fear electrified her. A scream bubbled up in her throat, but it came out as a whimper. When the sound dribbled around her lips, the foreman spun her around. He tilted his head back and launched it forward. His lips wrapped around the edges of her face, and the night got much, much darker. Rachel could feel the acrid, suffocating musk of the foreman's breath. His slimy tongue lashed at her nose, and before the lack of oxygen could get to her, she felt a powerful pressure, a suctioning. Her eyeballs got tight in their sockets. the moisture in her mouth was ripped out. And soon, the contents of her stomach started to rise against her esophagus. I had to stop my neighbor before he could finish. I didn't need to know how it felt to get your life sucked through your eyeballs. What I really wanted to know was, well, a lot of stuff. Did Rachel make it? What became of that town? Where was it? Were the night folks still around these parts? My neighbor didn't respond, just crossed his arms. It was then I noticed a mark on his left forearm, a crescent moon. My heart skipped a beat. I was sitting on the porch with the foreman, the same guy who hoovered the life out of nowhere. The foreman glanced towards the tree line at the edge of his property. I followed his gaze, and I saw them. People, standing in the shadows among the trees. That's when the foreman told me nowhere had suffered since that night. Without the day folk arranging the tourism and beautifying the place, it fell into disrepair. The night folk still lived in nowhere, but the town existed on the fringes now. Its residents were observers of the world, not participants. He said, "We thought it would be better without them. It's not. They needed us, but it turned out we needed them too." I let the silence hang between us. Then I rose and said my goodbyes, headed towards my rental. I wasn't going to bed though, not yet. I was going to find some of those old cookbooks I knew were inside, the ones Grandma used that summer we stayed here. They were probably still full of her notes and corrections. I was thinking I should make a dish for my neighbor, because I don't think Grandma was being altruistic when she made that guy those pies. She was being smart. Community is all about balance, and sometimes a little appreciation is all it takes to keep the peace. Run Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Kate Murdoch and produced by Abakar Adan and Lee Mengistu. Editing by Abakar Adan. It was sound designed and mixed by Greg Devins II. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman. And artwork by Jessica Clogston-Kiner. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slaywin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are MrBallen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levitt. Executive producers at Will Media are Will Malnati and Rosie Guerin. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.